I'm preparing all the ingredients to put into the standard Bosch mixer, and this is the recipe times 3 to make the standard bread dough. I'm going to put in 4.5 cups of water. Now I do temp the water temperature to make sure it's about 100 degree. 114 is a little bit high, but 100 degrees so that it's not too hot and not too cold. And you want that temperature so that the yeast can bloom properly. Now in this particular situation, I had some active dry yeast, so I had to make the yeast rise separately in a small amount of the water. So what I did is I reserved some of the water from the recipe, and I added the yeast to that water along with a little bit of the sugar that comes in the recipe to get the yeast to bloom. So you want to do that with active dry. If you're using instant yeast, you don't need to do that step. You would simply add the yeast at the end on top of the flour. So this is an extra step just because I only had the active dry yeast. Now you see me putting the salt in the water. You never want the salt and the yeast to combine, so I'm putting salt in the water, and then the yeast is acting separately in the meantime. I like to put my olive oil at the same time in the water. So I'm measuring out about a cup of olive oil. And I start with the olive oil first in the measuring cups, so that way the honey will slide right out when I go ahead and pour my honey in there. And again, remember I was blooming the yeast, so you're gonna see me saving some of the honey to put in the yeast so that the yeast could rise. Now at that point, I'll mix it a little bit and let it sit for a few minutes so that the yeast could do its thing before I put it into the bread dough. Now you see me removing the flour. I'm about to remove the flour that I freshly milled, and that's the whole point of this, is to use freshly milled flour because that's gonna give you the most nutrients. Once you freshly mill your flour and you use it within 3 days, you're getting all the nutrition that your body needs. So I'm taking it out of the canister and I'm about to put it into the mixer. This is a lot of flour because, again, I'm making the recipe times 3. And once you use freshly milled flour, you'll recognize it right away because it looks darker. It has like a different, smell to it, which is like a nice fresh smell to it. And it's just very different than the store-bought flour that I've used for years without knowing. Now at that point, I do put some gluten into the dough just to help it be a little bit softer. And I put 3 teaspoons of the gluten. And then I'm gonna go ahead and follow with the sunflower lecithin, not soy, because soy is actually not as good. So I do sunflower lecithin. Which is 3 tablespoons. At that point, the yeast already started bubbling up and rising, and that's when I'm going to go ahead and put it all the way on top. Again, I did not mix the yeast with the salt because that would prevent the yeast from becoming active. I start mixing it on 1, and as soon as it starts incorporating, I put it on 2 for about 6 minutes.